Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to GovComms, the podcast that examines the practice of content communication in government and the public sector. My name's David Pembroke. Thank you for joining me once again, and welcome to 2019. Today, we speak to an old friend of mine, Barb Walsh, who is Senior Lecturer and Program Director at the University of Canberra and vitally involved in the program directorship of the Communication and Media faculty, where she's also the convener for the Workplace Integrated Learning and also course convener of the Bachelor of Communication in Public Relation. She is a Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. She is on the Secretary of the New South Wales ACT Committee for the Australian Collaborative Education Network. But prior to being involved in academia, Barb was in fact a practitioner. She spent 25 years in PR, managing her own consultancies in Sydney for about 4 years, but then also working at a senior director level in quite a few, actually, Australian public service agencies. So she has that broad experience between education and also her time in the public sector. But most interestingly, one of her big tasks when she was in academia was to write a PhD called The Tightrope Walkers, an exploration of the democratic role of public communication in the digital age. Now, that is absolutely bang on relevant for us, and we'll come to a conversation about that, but she joins me in the studio now. Barb, thanks for joining us on GovComms.
My pleasure, David.
Well, listen, great career there. Lots of stuff,
you.
the academic and the education, the time that you spent managing your own PR agencies, working in government. What are some of the big takeouts that you have seen just over the last few years, really, in terms of what's changing and how people are managing this dramatic change that we're all sort of dealing with, given as we move to, multi-channel environment, fragmented communication, fragmented attention? What are some of the big challenges that you're observing?
Well, that's a big question.
It is a big question.
So I think seeing as I work in the education space now, I think that one of the biggest challenges I see in terms of education or higher education and industry is the integration of those things and ensuring that I guess that both undergrad and postgrad students can undertake really relevant education while they're kind of embedding themselves in industry, if you like. And that's a challenge for education, I think, because it's moved, higher ed is moving from a space of being a bit more isolated to have it to be, a lot more porous with industry.
Yeah.
And that is, I think that's particularly challenging in the comms space. I mean, look, it may be challenging in other spaces, and I don't know, for arts and design, and certainly for, health disciplines and industries, that's a challenge. But for comms and media, I think it's a particular challenge just because things are changing so fast.
Yeah.
So
but it's also a challenge for industry, isn't it, to try to find the opportunities for students to integrate them into their work because they're busy doing the work and not really set up to be supervisors or, yes, you can have interns that come in and do some work, which we have done for many, many years here at Content Group with people from the University of Canberra. But sometimes it can be challenging to give the students exactly what they're looking for or exactly what they need.
Sure. And I think that we're certainly moving towards, well, certainly in our faculty, and I know in lots of other universities, we're moving towards more agile means of work integrated learning. So it's not just the internships, it's projects. Yeah. It's teams of students working on coming up with solutions to difficult or complex problems. So there's that. There's creative kind of approaches. There's creative lab. There's there's studios. There's a whole range of different ways in which I guess academics can work with students to integrate them with industry. But I think it's the bigger challenge of, well, it's that, but it's academics staying on top of the changes in industry. So and ensuring that they're skilled ahead of the students. And so not just academically, but actually in all the kind of literacies that industry demands. So that's why we need to involve industry in quite a deep way and in a way that benefits everyone. That benefits industry and the students and us.
The challenge for industry is to stay on top of industry and changes, because of the dramatic change. It is quite difficult to stay relevant. And I think what we're seeing is it's sort of an increasing move to specialisation because of the requirement and because of the depth of knowledge that's required in different areas that as opposed to being more generalised as people were in the past, there's people are moving towards their specialties.
Yes. And so that is also then a challenge for how we teach that, right? Because the roles are changing and because the strands within the common media industries are expanding. So as educators, for example, we're changing our degrees in the common media or actually in the whole Faculty of Arts and Design this year. So just to give an example of the changes in the communication and media program. So it used to be that we had a Bachelor of PR, say, Bachelor of Advertising, journalism, etc. So now we're too small to offer fine strands like that. So where advertising is now marketing communication, PR is now corporate and public communication, and that includes public affairs and PR, and so it's we need to be broader, in fact, but still enable those kinds of specialisations underneath those broad umbrellas. But it's also changes like community engagement, like community online management, all of those kinds of things that we know our students are going to go out and be working in those kinds of roles. So we need to also try and accommodate those changes and those evolving specialisations, if you like. So it's an interesting space.
What's your and before we move on from that, and so how does the university cope with that? How does it move quickly enough to remain relevant enough? And is there demand for these courses that you're designing?
Well, look, the figures so far for this year are looking very good, but I'm not going to give you any figures because they're not definite at this point, but actually it's looking really positive.
Right.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is, how do we stay on top of it? So we need to engage with industry constantly. So we need to have kind of advisory groups where we touch base with industry to say, we're teaching this in this unit. Does this make sense to you? Or in this program or degree, does this, what are we missing out on, etc. We involve industry people as adjuncts. We involve them as sessional tutors. We get them in to do masterclasses and workshops, and we ourselves stay engaged. So, I'm now on the board of the IABC. So that is part of my role is comms and media, and that's how I stay engaged with the industry in that way. Right. So another part of my role is the work integrated learning, and so that's why I'm on the Collaborative Education Network, for example. So I think academics need to stay engaged and involved in professional associations and industry groups like that, so that we're forever aware of changes. Yeah.
So just going back to your time, preparing your PhD, where you actually went about and took a very deep dive into this challenge or an exploration of the democratic role of public sector communication in the digital age and calling it the tightrope walkers. What was the sort of central takeaway that you brought from that PhD, which was completed in 2015? And has anything changed in the last few years that would perhaps challenge anything that was in that PhD in terms of the core thesis that you explored and revealed?
Look, I think the environment has changed significantly. So it might have been awarded in 2015, but the research
Right.
was around 2011. So, I mean,
okay.
look how long ago
Yeah,
that
wow.
was. I mean, it's like dog years, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, in terms of digital.
Yes.
And how far I think the communicators, public sector departments, etc., have come since that time. So, so back then, way back then, I guess it was a case of, and I started the PhD in 2010. So then was interviewing people in 2011 and senior people in the APS, in the Australian Public Service. So back then it was really a case of, at its very early stages, what were the challenges for communicators and what was this throwing up for the role of communicators? And that was, I guess, my hunch, having worked in the public service way before that time, maybe around 2000, from 2000 to 2007, say, 2008. I guess social and digital were what was a big challenge for communicators in terms of this evolving awareness and different ways of communicating by citizens, different expectations of their institutions, and then how both public sector departments, how they were going to manage that, and how communicators in the middle, the boundary spanners, the ones who are responding to the needs of the public, but they're also juggling the demands of their managers and their senior executives, etc. And they're the ones who are explaining the need for transparency and dialogue and all of those kinds of things, and quite often up against quite entrenched views of senior, bureaucracies or senior levels in bureaucracies about an unwillingness to engage, etc. So I just suspected that it would be a very big challenge for communicators and that would highlight issues with communications. And I guess in the conversations with those senior managers, a lot was revealed in that regard, in terms of that, yes, the evolving demand for transparency from citizens was a challenge for communicators. It required them to have a lot of agency within their departments, to have a lot of credibility, to be listened to by senior managers and or senior levels of bureaucracy, and to, I guess, to be able to argue the case to embed social media channels in the suite of channels that the department was using.
Yeah.
So yes, it was. I guess what I came out with. You ask about the central kind of thesis, if you like, is that really the way that all played out. That social media and the use of social is like a litmus test of how communicators how they do their jobs and how they're allowed to do that, or have the capacity to do their jobs in departments, and that then also reflects the democratic intent, or the intent to engage by that department. So, and that, I mean, I haven't operationalised it because I'm basically a teaching focused academic. I don't. Research now isn't part of my role. So I haven't operationalised it, but I suspected that you would be able to operationalise that in terms of, okay, you've got a managerialist approach of a department. They're not interested in engaging. They're not interested in opening up comments on various channels. That then dictates how the communicators do their jobs, which is being at the end of the line, being told what to do, produce this brochure, do this bit of media, as opposed to being involved early on in the chain. And everyone talks about that, all of those communicators, and still I know that communicators talk about that, the fact that we're not involved early on.
It is still a problem. It's probably the biggest, most consistent theme that you have when you speak to public sector communicators.
Yes.
Is this lack of understanding, perhaps, of the benefit that the policymakers could achieve if, in fact, they invited the communicators into the into the room, as opposed to issuing them with instructions after the heavy lifting has been done.
And well, look, and that's got a lot to do with I think a whole range of factors. An embedded view of PR or comms as being something kind of light and vaguely kind of spinnish that comes at the end, and that's not necessarily related to the personal attributes of the communicators and their roles, but it's a general view of comms. And then I think there is a legitimacy factor about communicators in public sector departments that, they're not seen as having the kind of, what's the word? Just having not just legitimacy, but enough kind of grunt, if you like, to understand policy. And I think that's where, with social media, where the engagement is very direct. That there's a lack of trust there to allow communicators to manage that, it's a difficulty. So, I guess we've come from the days where departments would take ages to approve a media release. They'd take ages to approve, the finely crafted words that go out to the populace, right? And then now we have a direct, very fast kind of engagement. So the role of communicators in that space is challenged. So they need to. So it's a matter of trust. It's a matter of having the right information, having the right kind of very fast, more access to the right people to enable them to get the approval and the support behind that kind of engagement, and that isn't always there.
Did you land anywhere during your in the PhD as to a solution as to how to solve that particular problem? No. No, I think that there is more work to do on that. It's a massively under-researched area, isn't it? Why is that? Is it again?
Well, look, again, when this was done, government communications was quite under-researched. I think a lot more work is being done in that space now. So there is, it's not a desert as it was before. So, right. But still, there is just a massive amount of research that could be done in this area. It's just fascinating, and I think that the big difference between, I guess, the way that communications is enacted or practiced in government or in public sector departments, as opposed to the private sector, as opposed to the community sector, it's got a lot more challenges and it's a lot more loaded, I guess. And I think there's a lot of responsibilities that government communicators kind of carry in terms of democratic engagement, if you like. It is it's a fascinating area, and it's really a lot of scope.
Do you have any insight as to where it may be heading? In terms of, do you think the communicators are making some progress? Because
Yes, I do.
I know, for example, say, the behavioural scientists have been able to find a place in policy and find a place and really taking on some of the role that communicators potentially have been playing for some time, but they've been able to come in with their methodologies and frameworks and other things and being able to establish that credibility that you talk about, whereas the comms people still maybe don't have the tools that can earn them that credibility.
I think that there are some. I think there are some examples of very senior communicators who are doing great work, and who are involved or a part of senior executive decision making.
Yep.
And I do think that because, I guess, of the need for expertise in the area of digital and social, I know that it's a democratising tool, so everybody thinks that they can do it. But at the same time, communicators have a particular role to play in that space, and it's a case of kind of arguing that and demonstrating that. And I do think that, I guess in the examples that we've seen of good communications in the last kind of year or so, I'm just thinking locally, I think that there are still challenges, but I think that there are communicators doing great work and being recognised for that work organisationally, which is fantastic to see.
Yeah. And what are some of the characteristics of that great work? Is it it's relevant, it's understanding a problem, it's using a channel correctly?
I think it's all those things, but I also think it's where the communications obviously isn't an add-on. It's entirely related to the organisational kind of intent or the organisation's strategic objectives. So it's embedded in that process as opposed to something that comes at the end.
The end of the line.
Yes, and that it is evaluated. That it's that the return on investment is clear. I think all of those things. I also think the attributes of the senior communicators. I think as demonstrated or discussed a little bit in my thesis, that there are attributes of communicators who are they're agile, they're opportunistic. They have a lot of strong kind of personal attributes that enable them to engage at senior levels and to represent the comms function in a way that then is accepted and is respected. And I think that's really again, there's a lot of work that's been done on that kind of those aspects of communicators, and what they can do to be at the table, to be at the decision-making table. Yeah.
You mentioned one of the key things around measurement and evaluation and, that being a tool for credibility. What do you see as the biggest challenges and what did you see as the biggest challenges around that when you were actually a senior practitioner in the government? How hard was it to be able to evaluate what it is that you were producing and distributing?
Hard, because it requires money, and it requires, I guess, an agreement up front of a strategy that's accepted or approved or whatever, and that has an evaluation component in it. And quite often, as we know, kind of projects happen too quickly, for that. But I think that most of all, it's the it was the commitment, the financial commitment that was required. But I also think
by financial commitment, you're talking largely around
to evaluation,
through surveys or through other
whatever it may be, whatever it may be,
and the time as well, because often it's okay, that's done. We've got 55 other things on the list, so let's keep moving.
That's right. So I mean that's what I found then. I do also think that maybe it may be a case of, I wouldn't say education, that sounds a bit kind of patronising, but in terms of communicators being entirely across evaluation and the tools of evaluation, the processes. Not everyone has the same knowledge of that.
No.
And so I think there's a role there for professional associations and for educators, either through higher ed or short courses or whatever. There is a role for that.
And are you putting a lot of time and effort into that in terms of the education of the students to make sure that they're understanding, for example, the Barcelona principles, where they can look at outputs, outtakes, outcomes.
Yep. Yeah, I mean that's strategy is a part of all degrees. So it's a part of certainly the Marcom and the corporate and public comm degrees, and evaluation is a part of that. And then that would work through to like our capstone units, etc., where the students might need to do a final project with industry or whatever, and evaluate it and report on that to the client. So yeah, that's all a part of that. One point I'll just go back to in regards to involvement of communicators at the decision-making table.
Senior level,
One interesting thing that I did come across in the research for the PhD, and that was echoed in a few of the interviews, was that it seems that organisations that have been scalded and have had bad reputational kind of things happen, it seems as if they then understand the value of communications, right? So we don't want to wish that on organisations, but those organisations that have had bad things happen to them, they then involve communicators who are then involved in early decision making and early stages of program development and policy development, etc., because they then understand the risks.
The risk.
So and that is borne out by research. Yeah. In fact, that those organisations who have communicators at the senior levels are those organisations who've been burnt.
But I think that's part of the answer, I think, that you've just hit on, really, for communications people, is that if you want a seat at the senior executive table, you have to speak the language of senior executives.
Yes.
And that risk is absolutely right. Risk appetite and how organisations deal with risk is central to the consideration of the most senior people in any organisations, because that's the way they go about their, they organise their priorities and activities. And often you'll find so many risks could be addressed by effective communication if it were in place. And as you say, often when it hasn't been addressed in that way, organisations have been scolded, that they then think, oh, okay, maybe we should have done that. But I think that's one of the big challenges, is to reshape and reframe the benefit that communication delivers through the language of the senior executive, such that you can be there talking about risk, speaking about governance, for example, speaking about benefits. These simple changes that doesn't change exactly what it is that you're doing, but it's just shaping what you're doing in a way that makes sense to people who are looking at organisations from a program point of view or project point of view, so they understand. Oh, okay, right. So this is where your bit fits into the broader task that we're taking on.
So you can't just be a communicator.
No.
And you can't just talk the communications language.
No.
You need to actually understand the business of the organisation and then how that fits. And that actually was mentioned by a few of those senior managers, in fact, about their staff, that they were trying to encourage that understanding, if you like. So you couldn't just be hanging out there on the communicator's side saying, we're going to talk that language and we know about communications.
Yes.
It doesn't kind of endear you to the organisation if you are separate like that. So you need to understand the broader context and landscape so that you understand where that fits in and makes sense for the organisation, because you don't do strategies or deliver certain kind of projects or events, whatever, because it's fun. You do it because it adds value or it serves a purpose for the organisation. So, and that's understanding the organisation and its business. So, and I think that's another area of interest, or would be great to look at different public sector organisations, whether they're primarily policy, whether they're primarily service organisations or service delivery, and then how comms is different in those, enacted differently in those organisations, or how differently it's perceived.
Yes.
Because there's different purposes, I guess.
Yeah.
For
I
comms.
tend to agree with you. I think there's an enormous amount of work that is still to be done.
Yeah.
Just a final topic before I let you go, and it's this notion of trust and trust of the public in democratically elected institutions. And it's not just an issue here in Australia. Obviously, it's in North America. It's in Europe. It's everywhere. What role do you see as public sector communicators in terms of addressing that trust deficit and improving the reputation of public sector organisations, and how best can they go about doing that?
I think their role is huge. So I think that, do you know Jim Mcnamara's work on the architecture of listening?
Yes,
yeah.
I do.
So I think that his great work there really speaks to the role of communicators in that he found, and I don't know what whether he's probably working on subsequent research to that, and it came out a year or two ago, but he found that that the architecture of organisations were not geared up to listen, and that communicators and marketers in those organisations were a part of that architecture. So they weren't doing their roles, they weren't playing dialogic roles, because it's not what they were asked to do.
Yep.
So I guess that communicators can play a very important role, but they probably need to change, how they go about their business, but that, it's very hard to do in isolation in an organisation when that's not being asked of you.
Yes.
So I guess that's where the legitimacy of the communicator comes in, and the role of, their role in arguing the case for dialogue and for transparency and for listening and for then changing the organisation from within. So, it's not just them. It can't be just them.
No.
Just communicators, because it's just not going to happen if it's just.
And they're big, traditional, rigid bureaucracies in many cases with very well established, well entrenched behaviours, and so making change is a challenge.
Absolutely. But yes, I think that there is certainly a role for communicators to start that process, or at least to be part of that process. But it's a big call.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Just so one final thing before you go, what's next? What's big? What's going to happen for you this year in terms of that education piece? What are some of the next priorities that you've got to really help the students get ready and be job ready, so as that when they emerge from studying at the University of Canberra, they'll be good to go?
Well, I guess UC has a great reputation for producing kind of career-ready graduates anyway. We've always been a very practical kind of uni. We are increasing our focus on work-integrated learning. So this year we have a new curricula across all of our programs in the faculty, including in the communication and media program. So we are vastly increasing our amount of work-integrated learning. But we're also, I guess, starting from year one with professional orientation for students, getting industry, getting them talking with industry. Industry come in and meet with them. They do speed dating. They ask them questions, and it's all part of their assessment that they need to research the people that they're talking to. They need to research their questions, prepare them, be well presented, all that kind of stuff. So that's from year one, and that process also, throughout that unit of exploring what their industry is about, talking with people, etc., helping their career thinking, it then, I guess, gives them an early insight into whether that's what they want to do. We don't want to leave it up to year 3 or year 4 for them to do an internship to find out that they don't want to do that, that they're actually in the wrong degree. So it starts from year 1, and then we have work-integrated learning kind of opportunities in year 2 and year 3. And they are projects and they're studios and they're, for the art students, internships, etc. We do a lot of international stuff. Academics take students abroad on a whole range of different programs. We have that, and then we have the capstone units where students do really significant projects with industry. So it's a cohesive program right from year 1. So I'm quite excited about that. I think that it'll be challenging, and it's going to be far more resource intensive than running kind of purely theoretical units, if you like. But it's also a challenge to make sure that they're robust and they are, we incorporate a lot of the theoretical stuff, the reflective stuff throughout, so the students make the most of their opportunities, and also so that industry benefit, because otherwise, if industry don't benefit as well, then it's just not sustainable. Yep. So it's the win-win approach, which is exciting and that we're working on. So,
excellent.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, Barb. Well, thank you very much for coming
Dave.
in and having a conversation about all of that. It's fascinating. I think that this notion of change being ever present and how people are dealing with it. There's this. From the university point of view, you've articulated that quite clearly, that's a massive change in the way that you're going about preparing people. And I think that just reflects the massive change that's going on everywhere else in this space, and will continue to change, both broadly in the wider context driven by technology and new technologies such as machine learning, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, the new tools that are going to be there for communicators to be able to use to improve the way that they build that engagement. But ultimately, essentially, though, never losing fact that ultimately we're people. And people are people, and they communicate, most effectively by being as human as they possibly can. So I just think it's fascinating, unsettling as well. I've got to say, even from someone who's in the industry and dealing with it on a daily basis, that change is just something that is just always there, and you've just got to keep moving and keep changing and keep trying to find that place where you can add value and really deliver for public sector organisations as they deal with this issue of reputation and telling their stories more effectively, because they're so full of good information, and public sector organisations do so much good. It is so critically important that their communication function be effective as it possibly can. So anyway, thanks to you, Barb, for coming in. Thanks to you, the audience, for coming back once again. I'll be back at the same time next week. But for the moment, it's bye for now.
You've been listening to the GovComms podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes.